Hello everyone, I'd like to do a review on a book called When All Hell Breaks Loose by Cody Lundin. You would know Cody from the popular TV show Dual Survival. And this book definitely made me a fan of his before I even saw the TV show. And if you are a prepper or into survival, I highly recommend this book. It is definitely one of my favorite. It's kind of like a caveman handbook for primitive living, but with resources found in a more modern setting, which to me seems very different to a lot of other texts, and I would definitely recommend it, even if it's just to get that second viewpoint. But as a standalone book, definitely worth the read. It's not so much how can you get ready as much as what can you do after the event has already happened. So if you're a lazy prepper or you don't have that much in the way of resources, this book could really help you utilize what resources you have, hopefully. It doesn't really focus on individual scenarios, like it doesn't go into what to do in case of a hurricane or a severe storm or nuclear attack, biological warfare, fires, floods. It doesn't go into that. But what it does do, it approaches survival in that environment, being city, urban, rural, but in town. It approaches urban survival from a primitive living perspective, kind of like if you were making a book for surviving in a particular environment, such as for deserts or how to survive in the jungle. Well, this one is just how to survive in a developed urban environment. It really focuses on what is in that environment already that you can utilize to keep yourself alive, which to me seems like a very different approach to a lot of other conventional texts, which really makes this stand out. As a standalone book, it is very good in my opinion. However, it would also definitely complement a lot of your other survival texts because it approaches the situation from another viewpoint. It goes more into things like, what are you going to do for water? How are you going to find it? What can you use that you already have at home to purify and treat, or at least make the water that you can find safe to drink, using various different methods ranging from boiling it up to using household chemicals. Now, you would really want to read the sections on using chemicals to make your water safe to drink very carefully, because if you get the wrong chemicals, that could be catastrophic. So definitely read those sections carefully if you intend to use them. It also goes into things like how can you take care of your bodily waste, how can you take care of proper sanitation once the grid is down, with the kinds of things you would already have at home. You know, discussing things like digging trenches to do your business in, and proper sanitation with minimal resources, and not specialist stuff that you would want to buy ahead of time, but stuff you are likely to already have in a disaster or emergency or post-grid type situation. And it's got all kinds of other great stuff, including, eating rat. It definitely is a serious text, and I would highly recommend it. It's broken into two sections. They call it head candy and hand candy. Head candy is more of the psychological and information side of it. The hand candy is more of the practical, but I would definitely recommend you go through the first section as well. It's got a section on shelter, a section on water, a section on food, sanitation, hygiene, lighting, cooking, bit of first aid, some self-defense, communication, transport, should I stay, should I go, and all of that conventional stuff. And it is just so dense with useful information. If you've watched Dual Survival and you've seen Cody Lundin just start getting into rambling off, you know, the science and the applied physics of survival stuff, that's what this book is like. It really gets in. It's got a lot of practical stuff, drawing on his experience when he was homeless and his experience in primitive living and self-sufficiency. But it also really draws in on his knowledge of applied physics for survival and knowledge of, you know, applied biology for survival situations. There is definitely elements of that in here. But if you're looking for a good read and you're into preparedness or survival, I highly recommend this book. Even if you're just a wilderness survival person, I'd still recommend this book because it really is like a wilderness survival guide, except they've replaced the wilderness with a more modern setting. So a lot of the lessons in this book equally apply to the outdoors. Out of all the survival books, this is probably my #1 recommendation for anyone who is into preparedness or survival. I highly recommend this one, and I do believe that if you go online, you can even find copies of this signed by Cody Lundin. Now that I'm an even bigger fan of his, I really wish I had gotten one of the signed copies. Oh well. I hope you'll consider reading this. If you're still not convinced, he did a lot of interviews about this book, which you can find a heap of on YouTube, which really get into more detail of the kind of stuff that's in this book. Those interviews, some of the really long interviews, those alone are great resources for preparedness, survival, and prepping. However, they do not go into anywhere near the amount of detail as the actual book. But if I have tickled your curiosity, but you're not quite sure if you want to buy this book, I would definitely recommend you go onto YouTube. You go up into the search bar and you type in "When All Hell Breaks Loose" and try and find some interviews of Cody Lundin on this book. I would highly recommend watching them if you're not already convinced on buying this book. And even if you are convinced on buying this book, I'd still recommend going and watching them just to tie you over until it arrives in the mail. Alright everyone, have a good one. See yous.